Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group, the #1 group for all things contingent and talent and future of work even. I am ecstatic about this topic today because I've seen a lot in the market as we've changed cycles. There's a lot of evaluations going on in the market. There's a lot of new programs happening in the market, and there's a lot of new vendors in the market, and wanted to bring up the idea of the buyer's perspective in building a business case for change and evaluating partners. And I have one of my favorite people in the world, Kenita Brown, with me today. So I have to thank you, Kenita, because you've got such a great background and great perspective, and you're so respected in our industry with your perspective from being a client in the programs and then also consulting to help clients build business cases.
Yeah.
Kenita has over 23 years of overall procurement experience, 17 of which in the contingent space alone. Time flies, Kenita, when
You're having fun, I tell
you're
you.
having fun. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining in on the conversation today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jeff. I appreciate you asking me to join and look forward to the conversation.
It's been so fun working with you over the years, on and off, and just knowing you on different engagements you've been on. So it's really great. Not only you worked and you were in the seat of a buyer, right? Evaluating partners, building business cases. Afterwards, you said, you know what, I'm going to help other buyers by going out and consulting. And you take this very neutral approach to it in helping buyers buy better. And you actually make vendors more successful in the process as well of being evaluated because buyers are buying better. So, I just went, the best person to talk on this topic would be Kenita Brown. So, it's such an interesting time, right? Because when the economic cycles are booming, everybody's working very, at full pace. Evaluations often are at the wayside because you're just trying to get resources in. You're dealing with things. Sometimes you're busy in those big cycles doing it, reevaluations and whatnot. But a lot of times you're just working away. Then the cycles turn a bit and evaluation, you have time to think about strategically and, okay, are these the right partners we're working with? Or what are we going to add to our program? Are we going to roll out global into our contingent program, direct sourcing, more compliance tools, etc.? And so there's a lot more of that happening, especially even with some first gen programs that we're seeing out there. They're saying, okay, let's centralize our programs because got a growing contingent workforce and we want to evaluate that.
Right.
Like, what are some of the whys to build a business case and some of the whys around prioritizing what you should be bringing into your program? So let's start with the first one, the why.
Why build a business case?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to do all of that and nobody cares that you did it. I mean, a business case really helps you with alignment to the whole idea that you came up with. Whether it's driven by procurement or if it's driven by the business, particularly with contingent workforce, there are so many stakeholders across organizations. So you want to make sure that everybody is bought into the idea that you have to improve the program or to add on to the program or to take away from the program, whatever it is that you want to do. And you would not want, I've seen many times over the years, procurement has a great idea because they're driven by cost savings and they do an RFP and they're trying to implement this thing and nobody cares and nobody is going to participate. It is much better to take the time upfront to decide what you want to do and make sure that everybody is alignment to that.
It's so important to have that alignment and buy-in. And even if you feel that it slows the progress a little bit, right?
Yeah.
least then you're working with all stakeholders who are going to be participating in the program, and it actually will drive success down the road because you've listened in building the business cases, you've gotten generally get approval prior to that, and
Right.
then drives the downstream activities, right?
Absolutely.
With
Absolutely.
it.
And there generally are not any kind of aren't very many mandate driven organizations, right? So you've got to be able to convince people that whatever your idea is worthy to participate in. So, and particularly around contingent workforce. So again, you got to take that time up front to make sure people are aligned to what you want to do. It just saves time for everybody, particularly our vendors. You don't want to get them excited and then there's nothing that comes of it either. That's not
Yeah,
fair to them.
and that's often overlooked, right? The vendor community, and I see more and more vendors these days that are newer entrants into the market, and generally VC backed, or financial engineers, I call them, be it VCs or private equity. And a lot of them are time to revenue. Go, 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 go. Let's get revenue. Let's get revenue. Why aren't they buying? Right. And they don't understand that these are significant, larger scale projects that have an effect on organizations and are intricate, not only technology wise, but and how organizations operate. And
Right.
so with that, it usually is a slower process and takes a little bit more buy-in to cause change to happen, right? And so
Right.
it's an interesting time, and I love the idea that actually helping the buyers buy better and have a business case in place will create more success. And you named it. In our industry, although we'd love to change the model, it's contingent of contingent workers. So
Right.
your payment is contingent on usage of the program. So as a
Exactly.
vendor implementing technology, implementing a program,
And nobody
return
uses.
on investment is based on how
Mhm.
much they use it, right?
Exactly.
And so the
Exactly.
more people have bought into it, the more likely they will use the program. And that helps everybody involved, because the more usage, generally the better ROI on the program, because there's governance around cost, there's
Hmm.
governance around compliance, there's a bunch of different ROIs, right? Actually,
Right.
that's an interesting conversation. And I know I've asked you another question, but we can forget about that to a certain respect. Um, the ROIs that go into a
Uh-huh.
business case, I know they vary, but what are some of the major ROIs?
Oh my goodness. So obviously it's a return on the investment, whatever the implementation cost is, right? And that could be direct spend, direct money, direct checks that you're writing. But it's also the amount of resources. A lot of organizations actually have costs assigned to like their IT. And so IT is billing back to the departments the time that they use for the implementations, right? So you got to make sure that makes the case. If there are dedicated resources to the program that are going to be assigned to running it, the cost of their salary and their time are associated with that. Um, and then obviously you have just the general savings, right? What are the reductions in price or cost or reductions in process time that generate savings for the company. So those are some of the top ones that I've used in business cases before.
Yeah, and I find compliance is one, especially now with changing regulations around compliance and the more and more headlines happening
Oh,
uh,
the risk.
around
Hmm.
non-compliance with employment tax laws, and large misclassification lawsuits are happening. Are you seeing the business case and others around the talent side of it? And I guess it depends on if it's procurement driven or if it's more HR driven.
Hmm.
But we had seen a real push around direct sourcing, right, over
Hmm.
the last couple of years.
Hmm.
And it sounded like talent acquisition and HR was getting more involved in programs. Are those some of the ROIs that you're seeing in some of the business cases where the client and or the organization's demanding more control and getting better quality, more control of the process, getting the talent they need with some of the talent shortages we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, they want more control. They want to get better talent. They want to get it more efficiently. Um, and so, I mean, truthfully, then that comes down to resources as well, whether it's the internal resources it takes to vet them, right? The internal resources it takes um, to manage bringing them on board and offboarding them if they don't work, right? So the better process that you have about bringing in the talent, the better the overall the business works, right? Um, I often say procurement as a function, we are really designed to support the business. And we have to keep that in mind. As much as our grandiose ideas are, we have to understand what the business needs and how we can support that. So that talent piece goes with that as well.
Big time.
Yeah.
So in building a business case and evaluating partners, and really it's more about the business case, the readiness of the organization
Mhm.
for change and change
Right.
to something new,
Hmm.
there's all sorts of potential obstacles to readiness or it actually being launched, right? Even from the days that you build the business case and you get, you know, some buy-in, hopefully you've done enough of the research on some of these obstacles that you can fit into what the timing or etc. to be ready
Right.
so that you
Right.
can launch successfully. What are some of the obstacles that you've seen organizations have that are competing with a contingent program?
Well, any other major initiative that's happening can suck up some of the support resources you have to launch. So everything from legal being able to review the contract to IT being available to support or the main HR contact not having another project that they need to work on and so they can't work on that. Um, legal can be a big barrier that nobody really thinks about. But if they've got some major things going on, you're not moving anywhere to that
Yeah.
contract is done, right? Trying to think of what other parts of the organization, IT. Um,
Like even the culture sometimes,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
the culture.
culture will be an obstacle to too much change. And you may
Yes.
have to think about the scope in your business case as you identify the cultural differences. Some that are like open to change
Mm-hmm.
and not as protective of either their operational or their current talent or I've seen it and we've done work together in the oil and gas industry
Mm-hmm.
where the field services was never put in scope in the early days of these programs because
Right.
that's what got oil out of the ground and you don't
Right.
mess with that, man,
Right.
at all. And if you interrupt that talent supply, then that ain't you're hurting there's an impact to the organization, and so you didn't
Exactly.
want to disrupt it, so you had to get all the bumps out of it and make sure it's clean and everybody's involved and everybody's comfortable with it and can move that forward. So there's interesting things when it comes to culture of the
Yeah.
organization and how you're going to put different things in scope, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are some organizations or parts of organization that are kind of considered sacred cows. I've been a part of programs where, oh, we're not touching IT. IT does not want us to mess with them or their vendors. Okay, so we won't do IT, or we have to prove to IT that it works before we can actually start to implement it on a certain level. Um, you have, like I said, there's not a lot of mandate culture. So there's a lot of we have to prove it and then we have to bring other people to it, right? We have to prove that it works out the kinks and then bring other people parts of organization into it. Then there are other organizations that are just saying this is it. um, this is what we agreed to and everybody suck it up. That's fewer and far between, but it does happen. And so um, you just have to plan for that and that has to be a part of your plan as well. It's understanding how you want to roll it out, and having the right partners that are willing to work with the plan that's going to work for the culture. I've been involved in RFPs where vendors have said, nope, I can't do the slow roll approach. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to be
Yeah.
a part of that. But it's important for vendors to understand that there are so many internal dynamics that are being managed through the process of any change, any RFP, any rollout. And if you're not helping, you're really not helping.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
asking a million questions, pushing, um, it just doesn't help. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
And they may not understand from a vendor community. Once again, they've got pressures from either
Yeah.
investors, et cetera. So they're pushing, but they may not understand that there's these pressures on the other side, on the buyer side, to
Hmm.
say, hey, it's happening, but it's just going slower than needed. And there is always that, hey, it just may not happen, but you
Right.
just
Yeah.
have to understand that there is these situations that it's
And, and
so
I've been on,
dynamic. It's so
right.
dynamic, right? Even
And
if you
I've been
sign
on,
the contracts often, that you
hmm,
may sign a contract, but it then the rollout takes time to get to revenue, right? So
exactly.
it's interesting the dynamics from a buyer's perspective or a program lead perspective. When you get into a large corporation, there's so much at play and so dynamic that the key is to work on the business case, get alignment so that everybody's aligned and knows what they're getting into and the
Hmm.
benefits and the why to the organization and the how. And so,
Right.
that's my next question is the how. What are some of the best practices in building a business case, right? For an organization? Is it, doing your research? Is it working with a vendor community that has seen other organizations? Is it hiring consultants? What are some of the best practices um, in the how to build a business case? Is it internal stakeholder? Like it's probably a why and then a how, right? A
Right.
little bit. You got to know your why internally and then the how comes. But
Mhm.
what are some of the best practices building a business case that you've seen that those business cases through to implementation and ongoing program have been successful?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the internal alignment. I don't think that it 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work for any one function to build that business case. I think that going back to your very first question, that's what starts the alignment process. So as you work through why we want to do this and you bring the different groups of organization together, that helps to build the alignment when you go to sell to the executives that this is a good idea to do. So, I think that's one that really works. Definitely doing your research. You can lean in onto the vendor community to help you do that. If you have an existing vendor, obviously they're eager to expand their business. So they usually have a number of resources to be able to help you to do that. Um, I've had situations where um, they pitched the business case with me, right? So, they have a view across their organization, they have a view across other parts of business, and they can help to articulate it better than we can, right? So that has worked. The consultants, I hate to say that, even though I am a consultant. Having a consultant to build a business case is usually a privilege
Yeah.
that a lot of organizations do not have. It can happen if I'm within the organization, if I'm already doing some work and they just need some help to sell on this particular initiative. But generally, bringing a consultant in just to do the business case, haven't seen that a whole lot. Um, but yes, doing a lot of research on your own, talking to different suppliers, talking to peers in other companies that have done the same. I mean, in contingent workforce, there are so many resources between SIA and CWS and all these other organizations that can offer you perspective about what they've been through and how they've done it. So I think those are great as well. I also used to do networking with other folks in the industry, particularly like oil and gas is so niche. So understanding what they were doing helped. And you see the obstacles and you see the challenges, and you're able to build your plan around that.
Yeah, it is so true. And we are lucky that there's this weird niche of contingent workforce, right? That if you're
Yeah.
passionate about it, all of a sudden 17 years goes by, right?
Right.
That you're just, what just happened? I love what I do. And there's lots of others in our industry that have that same passion and has
Mhm.
seen different things in different ways and are willing to share uh,
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
each other. So yeah, I think the idea of talking to your vendor community, but talking to peers is huge
Mhm.
as well. And then yes, consultants, different consulting houses or different sources of template RFPs or these types of things or templates of business case and other external resources.
Right. Yep.
Research is
Mhm.
important too,
Mhm.
um, to have that third party validation of your
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
What are our peers doing, or what is the industry norm around cost savings initiative? Because if you can then go and say, hey, part of this is a cost savings initiative. We spend $200 million and the average cost savings of implementing a program like this is 10%. That's $20 million. Bang,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That's how we did it in 2008, 2009, right?
Right.
That was
Right.
the beginning. That was the takeoff of the contingent workforce, was in that downturn. How do you save the company $20 million? Bang,
Right.
let's centralize
Right.
this and look at it. And
Mhm.
so I think having external validation of that types of realities and ROIs are important. And then the idea around other ROIs like compliance and mitigating risk, or just streamlining of the soft costs of your processes is
Mhm.
interesting as well, right? So it's really cool when it comes to the how. The how, though, let's say you've been successful in building a business case,
Mhm.
getting alignment on the scope of the project and what you're looking to bring into the program.
Yeah.
What are some of the best practices around evaluating partners? Is there a step-by-step process? What is the typical stages of an evaluation? Um, from evaluating to narrowing it down to then implementation, etc. Like,
Right.
what have you seen there, and the stages, the steps, the timelines? Because it's important to also, I know that you're going to say the timelines will vary, but
Took
important
the
for
words right out
not
of my
only
mouth.
vendor community, but even buyers to know that this is not doesn't happen overnight, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, not at all. I think um the complexity around an RFP is just people just have no idea. And the more extensive the RFP is, which, thankfully what I've seen recently or what I've tried to encourage recently is, let's streamline it to the stuff that's really important, right? But you take an RFP that has, let's even say 50 questions, and they're all short answer with exhibits, and you've got 5 vendors. I mean, that's 250 questions to be read and scored. So, typically what will happen is when the RFP goes out, um, or maybe before the RFP goes out, you kind of develop your evaluation criteria and you weight what's most important. You kind of assign each of those questions to that criteria. You have your team, which is usually cross-functional, who's going to evaluate it. What I have done as procurement is usually being the central person. Once the responses come in, then I've got to put it all together in a way that makes it easy for the rest of the team to evaluate and look. So again, let's take 250 questions that need to be looked at with in between all your other work
Face,
especially
right?
from a
Yeah.
cross-border standpoint. Yeah. Um, and then you all have to come together, and then you have to talk, and you have to agree, and you kind of do a first round of cuts. You go back for clarifying questions. Then you bring them in for interviews or for presentations. And then you go back again and have more discussion. There may be some negotiation, et cetera. Then you finally get to a recommendation, and then you have to get agreement up high before you announce to the vendor what you agreed to. And then you go and make the award contingent upon completion of contract.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through the negotiation process. In the contract negotiation process, and that can take 30 days to 6 months to a year, unfortunately, I've seen, depending on how motivated everybody is to bring it to completion. And then once the contract is done, depending on the organization, I've seen some organizations that, depending on where you are in the contract and the confidence that you're going to complete it, we actually start working on implementation. But other organizations don't do that. In terms of, and then you go through the implementation process, and depending on what it is, that varies very largely. But in terms of what I would say to vendors and is they're being evaluated or how they help in that process, I can't stress this enough. Please follow directions. Please follow directions. Answer the question that was asked. Try to be concise, but also very much focus on your differentiators. You don't have to spend a lot of time with buzzwords. You don't have to spend a lot of time restating the same thing as a provider to 500 companies. I've done blah, blah, blah. No, I don't need to hear that. Just tell me, what
Yeah.
it is that you need done. That makes it much easier. Even the little things like meeting the deadlines, putting in the format that we've asked for, ask questions. If you don't know, don't just make something up. And really, really focus on your differentiators. The worst thing can happen is I can finish reading those 250 questions or that 50 questions of yours, and I don't remember really anything that you said.
Makes you different. Yeah. And it's almost like, if you think about it, to narrow it down to help everybody, you do this upfront evaluation scorecard, then you're going to pick 2 or 3 key differentiators and put them in the scorecard of each of those components that are made each of the vendors different, and why you would go over one over the other, right?
Right.
And the account management, style, pricing, etc., whatever the scorecard had, there's going to be point forms in the scorecard.
Right.
How do you get from, how many words per box to the 3 points? Show them, right? This is why we're different. This is why we're the best. Why we're a best fit for you. Because every program is different, right?
Yeah.
That's the other side of it. Is if you just use your template content from the last RFP, it might not be applicable to the next client that is in a totally different industry. So
exactly,
really
and it's very clear to the
Yeah.
client when you're using a template.
Yeah.
It is very, very clear that you have not customized it at all. And I'm not saying you have to do everything from scratch, but you need to be aware as much as you can about the different industry and the different differentiators between that particular piece of business as opposed to the general scope. It's so clear. And for me, it is so annoying.
But it's true. You've taken the time and went through the internal wranglings to get to this point. When you're inviting partners in, you hope for the same level of effort in their response to you. And actually, that brings up an interesting point. And I know we hadn't prepared this, but it's one of those things that it is a collaboration, right? The better you ask questions and the question and the information you provide to your vendor community, the better responses they will have for
Correct. Yes.
often. And so I found the more successful relationships and the, you know, and the more success even on the at the end, not only through the evaluation process, but even through implementation and success, is that collaboration between the vendor community and your shortlisted vendor community,
Yes.
that they're experts in what they do, and they will
Mhm.
say, I need this information. If the client says, well, I'm not going to give you that information, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get
Exactly. Yeah.
estimates, you're going to get assumptions
Mhm.
on pricing, you're going to get
Mhm.
assumptions on how many resources you're going to get
Mhm.
allocated to your account. And what is that old saying about assumptions? I think we all know it. Sometimes I
Right. Exactly.
say it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the more you can collaborate and actually listen to the vendor community during the valuation process too, even before you say, here's the 50 template RFP questions, to
Right.
make those templates more like the 50 more relevant, and the
Right.
information you provide to them so that they can respond with more relevant responses, the importance, it's so important. So and that's just me, but what's your perspective? I know, you know, what's the scope if you're only dangling, hey, we got $100 million in spend with
Right.
nothing to back that up.
Right.
As a
Yeah.
vendor community, we've seen that all the time, and we kind of call BS to it.
Yes. It
Eh,
is generally.
right? And so
Yeah.
at the end of the day, from a client perspective, what have you seen from that in the collaboration with the vendor community in building either the information you provide in the scoping document up front before you ask the questions, or even in sometimes tweaking the questions? How have you seen that?
Um, so you're right. The more you can kind of garbage in, garbage out sort of a thing, right? So it has to be an open dialogue and conversation. It has to be enough for them to be able to give you a real response, right? So a lot of people are moving towards a more request for solution type of thing, which requires you to reveal a little bit more about your organization. Some other things that you can do kind of on the front end is I've done kickoff calls for RFPs in which I give them the lay of the land. These are some of our pain points. These are some of the things that we're expecting and that we need. So they are able to get a little bit more flavor that you're going to see than you might see in those 50 questions. I always allow time for questions once the RFP is released. Generally, I'll say, I'll give you a week or two to look at the RFP and then get your questions to me and I'll get it back to you. So that you can get the clarification you need because it is unfair, right? But you also have to be invested in getting those answers. So, I've worked with, as a consultant, I've worked with suppliers and evaluated their RFPs, and I ask questions and they're like, I didn't even think to ask. I'm like, well, you were never going to give a sufficient answer without knowing, what their pain points were, how they're doing this currently today. Sometimes that information isn't available and you have to make the assumptions, but as a supplier, um, garbage in, garbage out, you have to give them as much information as you can.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
huge. And then I love the idea of that vendor kickoff call or more collaborative conversation as
Mm-hmm.
well, and transparency and honesty, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The honesty between the partner, it's I don't want to bring it into like getting into a marriage, but the garbage in, garbage out, and the trust is so important that
Yeah.
it's mutually beneficial. I
Mm-hmm.
think is the key, that it's going to be a collaborative relationship, because to make it successful down the road operationally 3 years from now, you've got to tell the truth and be transparent on what the pain points are. And then the solution providers will understand that and bring solutions to the table versus not knowing and then finding
Right.
out down the road. And that doesn't cause success, that actually causes issues. because they thought this was the reality and something else is the reality down the road. So I think
Exactly.
transparency all through the process
Right.
breeds trust, and you'll get better answers.
Yeah, I think one thing that vendors often underestimate is you're also being evaluated not just on how you respond, but how you behave in the process, because that gives us an indication of what your organization culture is like and how we're going to be able to work together. So, um, going around the process or even, not following directions, as I said before, or any other kind of non-desirable behaviors, that makes me think, is this what it's going to be like to work with them?
Yeah.
Okay, and it may not be on the scorecard, but it's a consideration.
Yeah, perceptions are reality in a lot of
Mhm,
cases. And if it's going to be difficult to work with partners and or you can't build that trust, uh,
mhm.
and if you're showing that in this process, how's it going to be down the road? So no, that's great advice. So to wrap things up,
Yeah,
Kanita, I always have the best conversations with you, but to wrap it
yeah.
up, like some words of wisdom. If I'm a program lead and on the buyer side right now, and I'm thinking of driving some change, right? Either be an enhancement to my existing program or I'm in Gen 1 and I've been handed the ball of
Mhm.
the contingent workforce. What are some of the things I should be thinking about and some tidbits of words of wisdom to start moving this forward and getting some momentum?
Yeah. Um, I think you need to make sure that you understand the business and what the business needs. Sometimes what you're incentivized to do is not in alignment with what the business needs. And so taking that time to, especially, if you're in a Gen 1 program that's expanding or even a brand new program, I think you have to understand what the pain points are, much like a vendors, and then think about how the solutions are going to meet those things. Once you do that, that'll help you get to the alignment. Networking with your peers, as we talked about before, understanding what's happening in the industry and what other people are doing that are actually driving results, and then matching that up with what you need in your organization. Um, and then considering the impact across the whole organization. Again, we're here to support the business, making sure they get the talent that they need. So it may feel like a good idea to have this cool little platform, but is that going to make it slower for them to get the talent, or is that going to make their talent less attractive, or whatever that may be? You have to consider all of those things. But the alignment, I can't say it enough.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Amazing. Kanina,
Mhm.
thank you so much for your time today. I know this has been a long time coming with scheduling it, but it's a great topic, very timely topic. And I want to thank you again for having a chat with me.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, Jeff.